All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our second live stream of 2025. Unlike a Tuesday night, which is usually when I schedule these on most of our live streams, I try to do them around Tuesday at 5:30. Today we're doing it on a Monday night. And that's only because I have a speaking engagement tomorrow. So if you're going to be up in the at the Hilton Cedar Inn in Redmond, the East Side Republicans tomorrow, which is Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. I will be there. I just couldn't do both the live stream and that event at the same time, and so I rescheduled the live stream, as I kind of mentioned last week, for Monday. So I hope that works out pretty well. The other thing is, I had mentioned, I believe, during my last live stream that I had a couple of interviews that I was going to put up, and I had some problems with the infield videos and audio files that we had. So I'm probably gonna have to redo those interviews, unfortunately. So that's why you didn't see those come out over the weekend. And so I'm hoping to get those interviews just redone, and it's really good information, so I'm hoping that I'll be able to do that and get that out there for you. So real quick, Tuesday the 14th, which is tomorrow, I will be at the East Side Republican Club, 6:30 p.m. At the Hilton Cedar Inn in Redmond. So if you're in that area up in eastern King County, feel free to come on by and say hi and come and hear the event. And I believe I'm the primary speaker there, although I think they have some other business that they're doing in the beginning. Also, if you are in the Spokane area on January 20th, which is a week from today, they're doing and it's the eastwafreedom.com organization out there. That's a website you would go to look at it. They're doing an inauguration party event that night. I'll be speaking at that event. And so if you are going to that event out in Spokane, or you live in Idaho and you want to cross the border and go to that event, they're doing a big celebration during the presidential inauguration. They'll be playing the video there, and you'll get a chance to meet up with a bunch of other like-minded people, and we'll be discussing a bunch of other issues that are related to how you can engage and involve and make an impact, and especially now that Trump's president, what kind of an impact that's going to have in a state like Washington, where we certainly have most of our political class, the leadership class that we have in this state, where they're going to be ideologically opposed to freedom, liberty, and sanity. So anyway, I'm hoping that that'll be an interesting venue for most of you to go to. Also, I'm pretty sure I have an event on the 23rd, and I can't remember where it is. I mentioned Skagit last time, but I think I'm doing that on February 4th. So I don't. Now I'm just going to wait until next week, and I'll tell you more about whatever the 23rd is going to be. And then, of course, the Roanoke Conference, which is basically the 24th through the 26th, which is that weekend in Ocean Shores. I'm on the board out there. I've been going to the Roanoke Conference since 2011, and I definitely encourage you to go there as well. I don't know if they're completely sold out yet, but we're really close to being sold out last time I checked. So if they will still let you sign up online, I would definitely recommend doing that. You'll have about 600 some odd activists, Republicans, center-right sort of folk from around the state, including a bunch of legislators, a bunch of local elected officials. It's really kind of an interesting group of people there, and it's really one of those events and a venue that you can actually sit down either in a social setting or during the program itself and get a chance to actually talk to a lot of elected officials, Republicans dominantly, who are trying to do the right thing most of the time, and you get a chance to hear what they have to say. You can talk to them directly, and it's really a great networking opportunity for you to meet with other activists from around the state of Washington. There's people that come over from east side of the mountains. There's a lot of people from north of Seattle and from the Vancouver area as well. Really, the whole state is all coming and converging in this one convention center in Ocean Shores right in the middle of January, the high tourist time. Joking about the tourist time, but it is kind of a neat opportunity, and it does give you a chance to meet with other people and network with them, and I think that's actually a pretty important opportunity, and that's really the biggest value, I think, is the networking. We also have some good speakers, good panel discussions for those who will go to those events. The Saturday night program and the Friday night program are pretty good. A lot of speakers that we've oftentimes had in the past out there. It's just a really good venue. You get a chance to meet a lot of people out there, and I'd recommend you, if you haven't subscribed or if you haven't signed up already, I would definitely recommend you do that. Being on the board is a volunteer project that I've had now for quite a while, and we don't get paid to be on the board. That's just a volunteer effort, but I'm very impressed with the effectiveness of the board organizing this event over the years with a lot of turnover on that board, and yet still somehow the Roanoke Conference keeps growing, and it basically sells out every year, and it's a good opportunity for you to network with other people there. So with that, that's basically the program that I have, or at least some of the events that I'll be going to over the next couple weeks. I'll update my schedule on the 23rd. I just can't remember. I know I agreed to do something that night, and when I was trying to take some of my notes here, I just didn't have it handy, so I'll have to update you on that. I recorded 3 videos today. One video is in response to many of your comments that some of the people had about how to comment or sign in pro-con on pieces of legislation. And I really just did a short video on that, just showing you with a screen capture so that you could look and see, here's the website I go to, and here's how to go and say that I want to sign in, here's how to write my comment, and here's how to send it in. It's pretty simple, really, and actually it's simpler now than it's ever been before. And so I definitely recommend you, if you don't know how to do it, then it would really help, I think, if you go and actually go to that website or watch the video. I'll launch it as soon as it's finished. Gets a little bit of editing left on it, but as soon as it's done and get it out there, I'm going to encourage you to share it with other people if they don't know how to comment or how to sign in and say con or pro on different pieces of legislation. And you can do it for both the Senate and the House. It's actually really a good way to do it, it's the problem. What I find sometimes is if you're so used to doing this yourself and you've done it for so many years, you tend not to get you tend to take a lot of things for granted, and it's not very fair, and you got to remember that a lot of people haven't been doing this for that long. And so it's important sometimes to run through a fairly simple training like this. It's just a few minutes in this video, but I think when you're done, you're going to be able to see how easy it is and how easy it was for me to comment on one of the proposed pieces of legislation. And it was a bad one. I did a con statement. And so anyway, that's I think it's a worthwhile thing for you to learn how to do, and I'd encourage you to see that video. I did another video about what's really going on with Ferguson's disagreement with Inslee over the wealth tax and a bunch of the other tax proposals, and how he's arguing that he wants to make these 6% budget cuts, what that really means, where he's actually going to cut, where he's not going to cut, kind of the virtue signaling, strategizing moving forward. More importantly, I provide a bunch of suggestions for places that if they truly want to cut the state budget, where they would be able to make those cuts and save the taxpayers quite a bit of money. Some of them are very obvious, right? Putting Evergreen State College out of its misery and ending that institution once and for all. I mean, it's embarrassing that we've still had it going this long, but it's there, and unfortunately destroying the future of every student that goes there. So it'd be nice if we just shut that one down. Ferguson, to his credit, and I'll give him credit if he's serious about this, is talking about reducing some of the overhead costs and at some of the other state schools. I'm assuming that's like Western, Eastern, UW, Central, and Wazoo. And if he really is serious about that, they make those cuts, that's good. It's not enough, but at least it gets a start in the right direction. His argument, or at least the presentation that he made, in case you haven't heard it, that he's going to want to try to cut about $4 billion out of the existing state budget. Now, there's a lot of games that go on in these budgets, so it's not as clear-cut as what he said. However, under their own probably severely flawed projections, they're presuming that the state's going to fall short over the next 4 years or so, somewhere between $10 to $16 billion, give or take. And that's unusual because over the last, 10 years or so, not quite 10 years, but quite a few years, we've had surpluses. And so what happens is you'd set a budget, the legislature would find a way to waste most of your tax dollars on whatever they can to squeeze it in and get to the tail end of that budget. And then lo and behold, suddenly we'd find out they're getting more taxes in than they projected. And so that'd be your surplus. And then of course the legislature would come back and find a way to waste that. So generally that's what's gone on. And although there is a rainy day fund, because we've had surpluses for many years, the scale at which the surpluses are coming to an end, and in fact they're going into the deficit, is significant enough that the rainy day fund, it would cover it, but not for very long. And so Ferguson's trying to basically take a $4 billion cut out of the budget, and he's exempted education, which is a problem because the 42% of the state budget goes into the education Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, so mostly the K through 12 program, actually pre-K all the way up through 12. And there's plenty of money you could probably cut out of that budget, and it would help close the gap quite a bit, but he's exempted that. I do agree, so I disagree with that, but I do agree with his not looking at public safety. So, and that's pretty smart, very shrewd move in his part, especially considering how the goofy and crazy and insane situation that's occurring down in California is demonstrating exactly what happens when you elect completely unserious and totally incompetent people to local government, and their focus is, of course, going to be more on rainbow flags and pronoun selection rather than anything that has to do with competency, overfilling reservoirs, running fire hydrants, traffic control, just anything normal that government has supposedly been elected to supposedly manage when they hire these bureaucrats. And as that whole system's collapsed down there in California, I really think that there's some pretty important lessons that we need to learn from what we've seen going on there and then apply them here. As part of that video, or just the reality anyway of that situation. So anyway, I have one story that talks, a video that'll be coming out on Ferguson and the budget and what's really going on and behind the scenes and kind of how that'll look moving forward. Related to that is the third video, which I did record, that has to do more with, after looking at LA and just seeing the complete fiasco and disaster that's going on there, which cities in Washington State are potentially marching down that road to serfdom, like Los Angeles, and making political choices and decisions and electing people to office there who are going to turn their cities into the next LA. Because one thing to remember is that it doesn't just happen overnight, right? This isn't just something, it's not just because some fire started somewhere. Los Angeles has had fires the last 100 years or more. It's a continuous way of life. What's happened is that as we've generally supposedly learned how to plan and prepare for modern firefighting programs and traffic and building standards and all these other things that supposedly indicate that we're making progress in the modern world, everything can fall apart suddenly when you've done a lot to degrade your emergency services and your law enforcement and all the other kind of key building blocks of what we would normally consider a fairly healthy, normal society in the modern world. It reminded me of years ago when I was down in Mendoza, Argentina, and I was climbing Mount Aconcagua with a friend of mine, and we were walking on the sidewalks, and there's funny things that you just take for granted that you don't realize, like somebody had stolen all the manholes, and so, or at least a bunch of them, and we were walking along, and I mean, you could fall right into these holes right in the middle of the sidewalk. Somebody had stolen them for scrap steel or something like that. And so, it's just the decay of a society as it starts to kind of collapse down. And that's a political result of bad governance. Now, of course, the interesting thing is that Argentina is apparently rapidly shifting from a basket case country into some amazing economic turnaround going down there, and that's directly related to political decisions. I don't believe that you should put your faith or trust in politicians as a way to save your freedom and liberty, but if you pay attention to freedom and liberty, you should try to elect people that are competent and understand that math is real. just because somebody's a Democrat doesn't mean that they'll always destroy the jurisdiction in which they are elected. Despite all evidence to the contrary recently, there are plenty of Democrats historically that have been elected that they believe math was real. They paid attention to the details. They cared about traffic. They cared about building bridges that didn't collapse. They cared about law enforcement. They cared about firefighting service. Practical people have worn the Democrat name in the past. We just don't have them very often today, because of the internal changes that have occurred in that party and the type of people that tend to get elected in local government. So anyway, it's quite a crazy time and worth getting into as we move forward. I'm going to jump in here real quick just so that I don't forget to get to the questions that many of you are starting to post up here. Real quick on this, the questions tend to be slow in the beginning and they tend to speed up in the end. And at the end, inevitably, I can't get to all your questions. So, but I'll try to get on top of it as best I can right now. When I go to pull up a question, you're going to see it look like this down here. So, and I do that on purpose so that you can actually see the question that I'm attempting to answer at that period of time. And even though I may segue off into a completely unrelated topic, I don't try to do that too often, but I do sometimes, at least you'll know the baseline question that I'm supposed to be answering. You'll know if I'm answering your question. It makes it easier if you say @we the governed like I have down below, because then I can actually see it pull out. And during the live streams, when I have a ton of people asking a lot of questions, sometimes I just can't see your questions as easily, and it's just a way to actually pull it up. So that's just my quick update there, and I'll get into a couple of these right now. I see that there's a few of them, not a lot, that are popping up. And we have a little bit lower turnout tonight because I am doing this on a Monday night rather than a Tuesday night like I normally do. So for those of you who are watching live, you will probably get a little bit more attention on some of your questions. Oh, this is funny. So Morris Breedlove, if you had to sit on your hands, would you be struck mute? Glenn. Really appreciate your presentations. That's actually really funny. And so I absolutely use my hands to talk a lot. And it's way worse if you actually see me in public when I'm doing presentations to audiences. And something just to keep in mind, I didn't start out planning to be some kind of YouTube guy. Never was my plan, really wasn't my intention at all. And what happened was I was working, I'd run for office and lost in 2010 in Thurston County, running for the most exciting office ever held in local government, which is the assessor's office. And the reason why I decided to run for that office at the time, I was kind of inspired to run because my dad had been down in Thurston County for about a decade by that time. And he had been appealing his property tax values every year in Thurston County, and he had prevailed. He'd won his property tax dispute with the county, and so they would reset. So then he'd get to pay the lower accurate assessment of the property. And then, of course, the next year, even though he won it the year before, they would reset it to the wrong and incorrect value. And he'd done this 9 years in a row by that time. So 9 years in a row, and he's getting ready to go into the 10th year, where Thurston County Assessor's Office had screwed up his property tax assessment again. And when I found out that the Assessor's Office was actually running their assistant assessor at the time, it wasn't assessor, it was like... I forget the term of the employee, but basically it's the number 2 in charge. He'd been groomed to be the person to take over. When he was running for office, I ran on the platform that once a decade, maybe, government should be able to maybe get it right. Just once a decade. That's about the highest level of achievement that I could expect to discover in local governance, and maybe once a decade they could get it right. And so it's kind of funny. It was my first experience running for office, and so I didn't know what I was doing in a way, thank God. I lost, but not by a lot. I got 48.1% of the vote in Thurston County, which, if you know the makeup of Thurston County, it was a pretty good showing in 2010. But what happened is when you're running for office, you have to go out there and do a lot of public presentations. And so I did a whole bunch of them, got pretty used to speaking in public, and I was terrible in the beginning. I didn't even understand what a 3-minute presentation was. There was a lot of ignorance that I had on my part. So I just had to learn as I went along. I started working for the Freedom Foundation right after I lost that election, which was great. But the Freedom Foundation was unusual because they gave me all this opportunity to travel around the state. And I would do maybe 100 presentations a year easily, either going out and doing presentations to speak at events, training sessions with activists, or doing public comment, or even public testimony in the legislature, or at local county government, or city governments all over the state. Did a whole bunch of public speaking. So here's what happens. If nobody's trained you and you are going to be going out and speaking a lot in public, you're going to develop your own style. One of my styles is that I use my hands when I'm speaking. I cannot help it. That's what I do. So I know it's probably distracting for you in video because really it's that more public speaking to audiences where you're answering questions or asking questions to you, that you get sometimes hostile audiences, right, where people are throwing all kinds of stuff at you. And so you're really used to that type of interaction. Then when I started doing videos like this, although I didn't get into live stream until a couple years ago, but when I started producing YouTube videos and recording like training videos for other activists, I really just took my public speaking skills, I'll put those, as such as they are, and I'm really just adapted that public speaking to the video format of talking to a camera instead. So that's why I use my hands so much, and it is kind of funny. I do have the ability to sit on my hands and still do a presentation, but it feels weird, and I feel like I need to use my hands to emphasize whatever it is I'm saying. So thank you for that observation. And Morris, always appreciate that. And it's just funny to have somebody notice that. Jason Fisher, thanks for commenting, Jason, or asking a question here. What do you make of Ferguson's no answer attitude on tax increases? And should we really take its word? Well, the point is there is no word. What Ferguson's doing, and this is smart, and I address this a little bit in my video later, remember the contrast between Inslee and Ferguson. When Inslee ran for office in 2012 for governor, it was a neck-and-neck thing. Rob McKenna came very close to winning that race. That's actually the closest Republican race that we've had for governor since the 2004 Dino Rossi race. And so it was kind of it was neck and neck, and Inslee felt a lot of pressure. He could tell, even with their survey operations they had at the time, Inslee knew he was in trouble. So one of the things Inslee wanted to do at the time was pretend like he wasn't going to raise taxes. And so he did what most politicians do when their back is against the wall, and they lie. And Inslee openly lied, repeatedly, endlessly, saying that he would not raise taxes. That wasn't going to be part of his administration. And so he said that. Ignorant and foolish people who didn't pay any attention to Inslee's lack of inability to tell the truth, basically, because he is kind of a pathological liar. They basically, some number of those people probably voted for him, thinking, hey, Inslee won't raise taxes, and so they shifted over and they voted for him. And then Inslee, I'm talking months into office, he immediately went in there and pushed through a big tax increase. Now, the only reason why Inslee didn't get more tax increases is that the Republicans were able to pick up either a bare majority in the Senate, or they got they were only a couple seats down in the House for a number of years there. And so close they had what they called the roadkill caucus in the state legislature, which is a lot of Republicans and then a handful of Democrats who still believe that math is real, and had some attachment to sanity and reality when it came to governance. And that kind of coalition was able to kill, for years, actually, any tax increases for quite some time. Plus, you were coming off of the Great Recession out of 2008, which 7 and 8, which really led to this for the first time, just some flatlining on some of the state agency budgets. They didn't really shrink that much, but they shrunk a little bit on some of them, and so that was high drama. And so you had Christian Gregoire had merged a bunch of agencies in an effort to do cost-saving issues, and so you rolled out of there. So Inslee gets in as governor, and he's just a total liar, right? Everything he says is a lie. And honestly, he's being more honest now as he's leaving the governor's mansion, and you saw his final budget proposal, which was absurd, and he came out and said that he wanted to do a wealth tax because it's failed everywhere it's been tried, so let's see if we can make it fail here even worse, regardless of the constitutional issues associated with it. So a lot of silly, dumb things that he said. Well, Ferguson is smarter than Inslee. And now Inslee doesn't care right now. He's got got his special grifting operations he's going to jump into now that he'll leave the governor's mansion here in a few days. And Ferguson's stepping in there to take over. And so Inslee doesn't really care what people think about him. He just has to pander to whoever the leftists are. They're going to hire him at this next probably an Enviro-type job, no-show job, where they get climate commitment act cash from the increase in gas taxes that Inslee originally said was pennies, but of course it's quite a bit more than that. And so he'll be working there. So what does he care, right? So he puts together a ridiculous, absurd budget. Now, Ferguson has to live with this for 4 years. And so he knows this. And so he wants to appear to be more reasonable than Inslee, which isn't difficult, but he also wants to appear more reasonable than the legislature. And so, because you got a lot of really crazy people in the state legislature. Not every Democrat there is crazy, but a large percentage of them are. And so they're completely divorced from reality. Math isn't real. All they care about is pronouns and rainbow flags and grifting kickbacks to their friends. So Ferguson's going to have to ride herd a little bit on this, or at least make it appear like he is. So, and Ferguson's actually capable of doing math. He may not appear to be that way, but he is. So he's saying, listen, I'm going to cut the budget by 6% across the board for the state agencies, and 3% on some of the higher education. All cuts which are easy and are desperately needed. I disagree with the fact that he's exempted OSPI and the 42% of the state budget that is going to education, because you have a lot of potential to cut something there. But he's not. He's doing that as a kickback to the WA. But nevertheless, he's saying, "Hey, I'm going to implement these minor cost-saving things, and we'll cut $4 billion out of the budget." And everybody's saying you need about 12, and so that leaves you with a deficit of 8, assuming the math is real at all anywhere along the way. And so what'll happen is there'll be a couple of tax increases that do get proposed by the state legislature, the Democrats in the state legislature. The Republicans, unless they're self-destructively insane, are going to oppose all of them because they don't need new taxes, but the Democrats want to keep the gravy train going. And so it's going to be smaller by a little bit, it's spread over 4 years, so it's probably just a few $1 billion short this year from what they would ideally want to squander. And so what Ferguson's doing is he's saying, no, we're not going to go have a tax. He's not saying he won't do taxes. He's just saying that's not his first step. So it lets him appear to be the only adult in the room on the Democrat Party side, and which he maybe is. And so he puts this out and says, I'm going to do these cuts. Then the virtue signaling Democrats will know that some of their ideas, even if they pass them as law, won't happen. So they just get the benefit with their leftist supporters of proposing bills they know aren't going to go anywhere. Sometimes even bills that they know he may veto, and they may know that ahead of time. Like they may get some stuff to the legislature that makes them all feel good about themselves because they do have a majority in both houses, and then knowing that Ferguson's going to veto it just because then that makes them feel good. They got to go back and raise more money from their supporters. Sorry, didn't work this time. We'll try to do it next time. They don't really care whether it works or not. It's a way to justify their existence to the lobbyists and their supporters. And Ferguson gets to appear to be the adult in the room. And Ferguson's desperately needing this because the LA disaster and the fiasco out of California is overshadowing the local government narrative. And remember, Ferguson and Inslee before him have kind of modeled their existence as like kind of a mini-me to California. And Newsom seems to be self-immolating as governor of California as we speak. And you can't really look around at any of these other governors and think, wow, they're doing a great job. The governor of Oregon's floundering. The governor of Colorado's not doing a great job. The Democrat governor up in Pennsylvania doesn't seem to be too crazy at this point in time. But Massachusetts and New York, they're doing terrible. So you have a lot of bad outcomes occurring where Democrats have had some power. Not that that's a surprise to anybody who's paid attention here, but Ferguson still has aspirations to run for president. They're probably just like Inslee did, just like Gregoire before Inslee. Gregoire was smarter than Inslee. She knew she couldn't go anywhere, so she abandoned those aspirations. But Inslee went out and proved that he couldn't get 1% at a national level. Ferguson would discover the same result, and he knows it. So what he's trying to do is pretend, or at least put on this image that he can portray himself as a reasonable one, and then when he's finally got his back against the wall and he's forced into it, he'll accept one of these other taxes. The most likely taxes that'll probably come through is some kind of a modification to the B&O tax, or the probably reducing the level at which they collect the capital gains tax. That's what I would guess. If I was to guess anything, it'd be one or a combination of the two of those taxes. But we'll have to see. So that's what's going on right now, and don't ever trust them, but be aware that's happening. And listen, Ferguson and I are probably as far apart as you can. I know he hates me, and he used my name a lot in vain not that long ago. So I am not his best friend. Believe me, he completely does not like me. And I'm sure they're already putting me up on their, what is it there? He has that Orwellian kind of operation there for censorship. I'm sure my name's already been thrown in that hat. But nevertheless, you still need to recognize when you do come to common agreement, cutting the state budget is something I'll always support. So now I don't want to have them cut public safety first, and it appears he's not doing that. So I agree with that approach. But cutting the state budget's necessary, and it's way better than raising more taxes. Part of the problem is, right, the money you get, it's not just that you need to stop spending that money. It's that a lot of the money you're spending is used to facilitate a shocking amount of fraud, waste, and corruption and just abuse that you're paying for the abusers to keep abusing you. So cutting that down is a good thing. Jason, second question here for you, and I see a couple more that are along the lines from other people after this. What's your thoughts on the LA wildfire that you think are the causes and solutions? Should LA receive a federal bailout? Well, to be fair, I think that you will see some type of bailout from the feds. It's probably not going to be what they think. And remember, a lot of these are really wealthy people that have lost everything. That's absolutely true. And you see this cascade effect of what happened in North Carolina recently with the hurricane and the storms and the flooding and all the chaos that occurred out there. And remember, FEMA was given $700 checks out there. And sure, they threw a lot of money into the FEMA fund, but that was only because the FEMA fund had been wasted, mostly in being handed out as cash, kickbacks, or support for illegal aliens coming into the country all over the place. And anybody that says that's not true, it's just not been paying attention. That's where the FEMA money went. They bragged about it for years. They did press releases about it. This is as public can be. You have to completely ignore that to think that FEMA money didn't get spent managing a lot of illegal non-citizen. That's where all the money went. So they were out of money supposedly when the hurricane struck from through Georgia all the way up into North Carolina and created this massive unpredicted weather event there. So then, of course, FEMA didn't give any money and promised them $700, and many of them are still living in tents. It's been chaos. Again, if you trust your future to the government, you will always be disappointed because they will fail almost every time. Now, they can catastrophically fail or just barely fail a little bit. Lately, they've been catastrophically failing. When I look at the situation in California, they have known about this exact type of fire and this exact type of scenario for well over 100 years. This is very, very well known. What they used to do is manage the brush better. That was one thing. Forest management practices in California, they figured that out in the late 1800s, and they started doing fire break, building fire breaks, brush clearing, forest thinning, a lot of more effective management of the dry tinder for future potential fires. So that's one. It's not the only thing, but it's one of the major, it's like a platform of the policy here. Number two, California's always been under a kind of up and down drought history. If you look through the history, even pre-tribal history, you can look back and see evidence in the geological record of major droughts and wet times and major droughts and wet times, and just a continuous cycle. It occurred long before the concept of human anthropomorphic, right, climate change or impact, right? This has existed there for a long time. So in the early 20th century, early 1900s, right? The settlers, they weren't settlers anymore. I mean, just the people living in California. They decided, okay, we're going to build a massive infrastructure with dams and with reservoirs and with water distribution facilities, because they oftentimes will get enough rain up in the Sierra Nevadas or snow melt, whatever, that if they divert some of that and save it for a dry season, they can both run support their agriculture in eastern Washington, or I'm sorry, in the Central Valley, and also have it for irrigation, for fire suppression, for drinking water in the more arid climates like Los Angeles and other places. This has been known for a long time. They knew it way back then. They actually laid out some pretty effective engineering projects, major engineering projects, some of which they started to build. Now remember, they started cutting back and stopped. They didn't implement their full plan. They were fully aware of the potential future population. They were fully aware of having extra reserves for really dry times and being able to capture the rain when it came down in really heavy times. But of course, the enviros in the 60s and the 70s started shutting all that stuff down and prevented that growth from occurring. So now, fast forward to today, we're in a disaster zone where, in addition to having failed to continue the momentum of these were major projects. They weren't little. My great-grandfather's era, right? In grandfather's era, they were building, that is back when Americans believed you could actually build things. So they were building dams, and they were genuinely building some pretty amazing projects. And the designs that were on the books for long-term reservoir water storage in Southern California was, again, well documented, well known. They stopped most of that. What's more surprising is that when they were having fires about 15 years ago in California, the voters came out and they actually approved more local reservoir storage, and they approved it in 2014, and 10 years later they still didn't build it. So they had political support, the people voted for it, the money was there, they can't pretend it wasn't, and 10 years later they still couldn't build anything. Now that is incompetent bureaucratic red tape and incompetence at a scale that only happens when Democrats run government. It's absurd. It is ridiculous. So that's one. That's not the only thing, but that's a big piece of it. Then you had significantly unserious people being elected to office. And one of the things to remember is that if somehow your community is surviving year after year, decade after decade, and you haven't burned everything down yet, you may be distantly aware of the threat of fire, but there's no sympathy with the Southern California, LA crowd when Paradise burns up and all these forests burn up because of bad forest management, and up Northern California, and they don't care about that. It's so distant. It's like background noise for them. And so it hadn't hit their areas yet. They pay huge taxes. The taxes are supposedly going to support infrastructure like this, but that's not really how the taxes get spent. A lot of the taxes are squandered and wasted on esoteric, obscure things that are more feel-good for and have a big return to the local political class in some kind of kickback, voter turnout sort of schemes. So, for example, they will divert massive millions and millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, now hundreds of millions of dollars, and statewide billions of dollars, to essentially ensuring that nobody goes after the Mexican drug cartels. They're allowed to build these homeless camps and get a bunch of drug addicts that live all over these cities, get them addicted, let them die off frequently with fentanyl overdoses, but meanwhile enable that type of lifestyle and facilitate it. And they divert a shocking billions of dollars a year down there. I mean, I thought Seattle was bad with $1 billion roughly in the greater Puget Sound area, but California is way worse. So they just divert massive amounts of taxpayer dollars to that. Then you see massive amounts of taxpayer dollars dumped into ridiculous, like the multi-billion dollar, I don't think it's $1 trillion yet, but it's like the multi-$100 million train to nowhere project that has been going on for a long, long time now. I think about a decade. That's going nowhere. So malinvestment, bad use of money. Newsom's bragging about removing reservoirs in different places and removing dams, supposedly to help Delta smelt, but Delta smelt's a bait fish downstream, and there were other proposals that had been made about, okay, if you want the water to help the Delta smelt, why not just get it right at the very end before that water becomes mixed in with the salt water, and let's just pump it right back up, and we can use it for irrigation, we can use it for other things, and you'll still get this constant flow of water to help the delta smelt. And the Enviro shot those ideas down. There's no rational solution to the environmental, especially the fictional sort of exaggerated problems that they'll invent for new Endangered Species Act sort of claims. So those cumulative macro problems were really building up. And then at the local level in LA, you had this, a number of different problems that seem to be well documented to me at this point in time. Now, people I think have exaggerated a little bit the DEI aspect of this in this case, a little bit. Now, they haven't in the sense of a mispurposed funds that are wasted on stupid things like choir, the gay men's choir or whatever other, but those are just virtue signaling, goofy projects. Government wastes money all the time. That's just what LA was wasting their money on. The bigger problem was how they were diverting, because they still wanted to keep those goofy things going or things that aren't that important. There was no sense of prioritization in the budget process. And so what you would have is you have a bunch of crimes going on. They're not supporting the police. And then they would anemically support the police a little bit, but they would increase greatly the cost of the same type of law enforcement efforts. Same thing was going on with the fire department. You could cut a big chunk out of the fire department, and if there just happens to be no fire that year, you don't notice any difference. By all reports, it looks like there was a large number of fire equipment that was out for repairs, that because of the reduced budget, they didn't have the money to fix that equipment, and so the equipment just wasn't being used. I'm told, and it looks like it's been documented, that there weren't enough firefighters and that they were substantially understaffed as well. Fair enough. So those are clear problems with a reduced budget over years of the firefighting department. Now, the $17 million cut that occurred last year is probably too recent to genuinely affect whether they were ready or not. With that $17 million, I'm not sure that would have made any difference. There is no doubt, however, that the incompetent, incomprehensible failure to manage this one reservoir that should have been full of water, that would have made a big difference early on in fighting the fire, rather than having 20% of your hydrants basically run out of either pressure or water completely. That clearly had an impact, and that was bad, a cascade of bad choices and decisions with no backup locally. You also had the obvious weirdness of the mayor who ran for office promising to not take any international trips, but who promptly took international trips and was in Africa, Ghana, when this happened, even though there had been plenty of warning there was going to be really dangerous weather ahead. Now, that could be forgivable if you had a deputy mayor that was still there, but it looks like the deputy mayor had been relieved of duties, or was like in some kind of a holding pattern because he was being investigated by the FBI for some kind of threats against the city. He seemed like another real winner. So you had these goofy elected officials that were not serious about their jobs. When you look back on some of the hearings, the water board, and I trust some of the people I've talked to and seen them write about looking at these public hearings. They call it their water board or something, so they're the people that would be more familiar with firefighting preparation. They don't seem like they're unserious. It does seem like they didn't have resources. So regardless of however they identified, or their lack of engineering or hands on the ground sort of experience, they still seem serious about, based on the reports I'm getting about what they were short and what they were missing, and they were aware of it. It's just nobody cared. And there's no real push. I mean, they were excited about pronouns and rainbow flags and going in the Pride Parade, but they just weren't going to be interested in actually solving the problem. And that brings us, which is a good question, Jack Podler here. What are your personal thoughts on the California fires and what we could be facing in our state? Well, the one thing to remember is that in Washington, Western Washington, for sure, right now, like this time of year, I don't think you could start a forest fire with napalm and flamethrower, just with the sheer volume of rain that we have had, will have, and the saturation level that exists in the forest, and of course the type of plants that we do have in the woods here on the western side of the state. Now the east side's a little different. You still have bad forest management practices, which hurt us for a couple months out of the year for sure, even in Western Washington, because the failure to thin, the ridiculous DNR requirement now of leaving all this brush in the clear-cut areas so that it can more easily burn up in the future and serve as a perfect tinder for more widespread fires. Historically, the practice over the last 120 years or so had been to collect the woody debris that would otherwise serve as tinder and be risky, to wait until the rainy season or until it was safe, and then burn those piles up so you could reduce the damage and the potential damage of all that dead debris laying underneath the new trees that are growing up. I live on timber property. I have about 10,000 acres of timber property roughly behind me. I've watched the logging operations and the DNR change the rules now. Department of Natural Resources changed the rules and require them to do things that I believe have put the timber property that owns the property behind our place, much more at risk and more likely to potentially burn up if it hits that right time, that right type of weather condition sometime in the future. And your new trees are certainly at risk for the first 15 to 20 years as they're still small. Before they've been limbed or before they've been thinned, it's really a problem. And so we'll have to see. One of the things I did on one of my videos, and that when you see it come out, is I'm starting to rate the cities on the Washington state cities on the LA model, which is, LA is a 5-alarm disaster zone right now. Sheer incompetence. And it's not like the previous people in there were super competent, but the problem is it starts to add up. It becomes critical mass, and then all it takes is just the wrong set of circumstances and thing collapses. Same thing can happen in Western Washington or Eastern Washington. Probably not a fire. That could happen. In 1889, Seattle, Ellensburg, and Spokane all burned down the same year, right at statehood, actually. And in fact, that led to a lot of the fire management programs that you saw in Washington State for 120 years. Now, I'm increasingly skeptical that they're that serious about actually trying to put out fires like that or be prepared for it. But nevertheless, that's what led to a lot of these kind of that foundational approach to taking fire quite seriously. Part of taking fire seriously was doing controlled burns, thinning and managing your forests, limbing. There's all kinds of things you can do to reduce underbrush and understory fires. When you have beetle infestations or something else that kills the trees, taking those trees out and making sure they're not future fuel. Dead trees standing in the air do not help you in mass like that. And instead, our state foolishly decides to make it as disease-prone and as bad as you possibly can make it. And so the right set of circumstances come by, you'll have big fires like we have all the time in Eastern Washington right now. However, it's not just about fire. It's also just about basic structural design of the cities. It's about public safety. Other than the riots in Detroit, what killed Detroit was their failure to address public safety, and they just eventually made it so impossible to live there that Detroit became a ghost town. When I drove through that back in the late 90s, I was impressed with how disaster zone it was for miles and miles. It was the biggest area of just bombed out urban living that I'd ever been through. It was horrible to see. When I lived in New York City as a student before Giuliani came in under the Dinkins administration, that was an example of a city in decay at a massive level, really due directly to the fact that you had a complete collapse in public safety and 2,200 murders a year within about 10 miles of my dorm room. That's impressive. That's a level of corruption and disaster and chaos that very few people watching the show have ever seen outside of maybe some third world countries. So we've done this to ourselves in other cities before. Washington State is approaching that kind of a scenario in a couple of our urban centers. I would say the three most likely are Seattle for sure, because you have this compounding effect of not just incompetent, disastrous local government at the city level, but you have an overlapping incompetence from the King County governance, which won't help the city at all. And then you have the state, which is also going to be generally incompetent. They squander lots of money, so it's not about resources. The money it's malinvestment. It's mostly wasted. And they don't take other things seriously. They don't support the police. They do road diets in Seattle. You need more room to drive, not less. They do, again, light rail is a disaster when it comes to how the money's allocated, and single point of failure that nobody will be able to use. The minute there's a slight shakeup, you won't have any options if you're mistakenly using light rail. Fortunately, so few people use it. It's essentially just a mobile meth lab and fentanyl shoot-up operation so that they can get high with a view while they ride the line back and forth. But then you also, so I'd say those cities, and Spokane is another good example. Lisa Brown is the mayor of Spokane. She's a disaster zone. She's totally unserious about anything other than making sure that insiders and political grifters get cash from the taxpayers, whether she extracts it from the state or the feds into whatever grant grifting operation she's running. You can see the decay of Spokane visibly apparent when you go visit it today. Olympia is also that way. Again, horrible. Now, Olympia is compounded, just like Seattle, with also a disastrous county government. But both Thurston County and Spokane have had decent county governments in recent memory. And so to destroy a county government enough that it's not there to help the city still takes a few years. And so it takes a lot of work. The Democrats who control the Thurston County Commission right now are certainly striving to destroy their ability to provide any support for Olympia as soon as they can. And you have the decay of Tumwater nearby, right? You have some other issues. But it'll take a while for other than downtown Olympia itself, it'll take a while for the surrounding communities to reach that level of collapse that Seattle's reached. Everything's off the table, though, if you have a genuine, significant natural disaster like an earthquake or a terror strike on the power grid, for example, and the power's down for a couple years. Those types of things obviously completely put your community into overload. And when you have exceptionally unserious people like we have in government most of the time, it's not going to be good. And so those are the scenarios that I would be paying attention to. And one of the things I recommend at the end of this video is if you are aware of how you would rate these cities, I'm putting together a basic metric on basically, 5-alarm fire there as far as a disaster zone, just waiting to happen. 4 alarms, getting close, 4 fire piles. 3 is just on their way, 2 and 1, just different ways of rating your local government. And I think we could probably start to rate our local government this way and create a rating system where we could track the level of unseriousness, malinvestment, incompetence, political stupidity, theft, corruption, things like that. And you could really get a pretty good sense and fairly predictable analysis of when you have a city that reaches that kind of critical mass where it won't take much now to put it over the top. And again, it doesn't, just because there's a Democrat in charge doesn't mean they have to be that way. It's just that's the way they've been over recently. Jack Palder, local paper, thinks Fergie's sliced bread. Yeah, along with all the other Dem ideas. It's a Columbian, if you're wondering. Got to read it to know what our overlords are thinking. Yeah, and it's good to read the Columbian because they just report and regurgitate whatever they're told to report. They're not really a newspaper anymore. They're just essentially an arm of the propaganda crew. They're influenced a lot by Portland politics as well as Vancouver a little bit too. So that's what happens. Scott, Keith, any glimmers of hope this session, or should we tuck in and lament the fact that we could have worked harder last election cycle? No, I would say stay on top of these bills. I think that, again, I brought this up before, and there's an element of unpredictability associated with what really happens in Olympia. And when I say that, part of it's because there's a great distraction coming from D.C. With the Trump administration, I'm really not sure how their interaction with what they would probably view appropriately as pretty hostile governments out here, how will that interaction affect and distract the otherwise generally corrupt and self-serving sort of political class that exists in Olympia? I don't know, and we've never really had that type of experience before, so we can assess, we can think that we know. I'm fairly optimistic that the Trump administration will be attempting to put adults in some of these positions, and even though they won't be perfect, I would generally guess that they will be deporting a lot of criminals from Washington State, the criminals that Ferguson and his Democrat allies are trying to protect and keep here. And when you remove a lot of criminals, violent criminals, drug, cartel people, human traffickers, car thieves, all these other people that get deported. Obviously, not every criminal is an illegal, but there's a decent chunk of those who get deported that will be. When that happens, there's a positive impact on the community, and I don't know what that looks like. But inevitably, that should lead to a lowering of the overall crime problems, or at least some level of lowering there. the argument, because Washington State's a sanctuary state, that we would be a magnet for illegals basically coming here from other states like Idaho or Montana or someplace. However, I don't know how much that's really going to happen. I know those states will cooperate better with the feds, and they'll probably, deport their known problem criminal people, especially in workplace, businesses that are exploiting illegals for the labor that's coming in. When they start to hit those, they clean those out of those states. They're still going to be focused heavily in labor. I mean, I think they're going to level up to come after sanctuary states. So I don't see states like Washington, that the influx is almost what I think Homeland Security and the ICE guys are going to just wait for and just nail those guys as they come in. I also have some hope that Homeland Security, depending on who gets in there, will actually be willing to do things like put together, make public their non-U.S. citizen visa list. None of those people, these are people who are here legally, so they're not here illegally. They're not U.S. citizens, millions of people that are here on various visas, F1, H1B, whatever it is. Making that list public, which Homeland Security has complete authority to do so. Again, none of these people get deported for it, so there's no specific consequences to them. But by making it public, you're going to be able to see how many of them were registered to vote. That's not going to change the outcome of elections, because I don't think it's quite enough to make that much of an impact. However, you're going to see the incompetence of local governments like Washington State's absurd voter registration process, where we simply register anybody and everybody as many times as they want in as many ways as they want under any variety of circumstances, which is why when we've done these doorbelling operations, we find mystery people that don't exist that have somehow a voter record attached to them. And it's because of the many people that have come to me that are here legally, but they're not U.S. citizens, and they're all registered to vote, every one of them. No matter how hard they try to get unregistered to vote, they're still registered to vote. Even if they're a student from China, somebody from Canada who works down here, somebody who's living here on a visa from Australia or New Zealand, Denmark. I've run into people now in Mexico, right, Venezuela. They're all registered to vote, even against their will. It just highlights a weakness in the system. And the question is how many of them actually voted. We'll find out when that list is made public. But that's just an example of a way to start impacting the local government in a way that I don't see as happening. The dumb idea of removing the Snake River dams, that's gone. So that isn't going to happen. That was a stupid idea in the first place, pushed by incredibly unserious people, and a lot of money was wasted on that study, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. So anyway, I just don't, I don't see that. I think that mostly you're not going to see as much. You have a ton of terrible bills. Most of them aren't going to come out here. There's always glimmers of hope because of that. And sometimes, this has happened to me a number of times now, I've approached the legislative session, doom and gloomy based on the crazy, stupid ideas that get proposed. And then you come out the other end and you realize, man, none of those really came through. So there is a lot of virtue signaling that goes on the left, just like it does on the right. And the conservative side sometimes, where they just file bills that aren't going to go anywhere. They do the same thing on their side, and sometimes they get more campaign cash if they fail to get the bills through than if they actually got it through. So that is what I think. And I did do, like I said, a video earlier about how to log in and comment. I think that's something that's worthwhile for people to do. It's so easy now. There's no excuse. I just did one today when I was prepping the video up just to show what it's like. Shelley Belly at We the Govern. Can we get a federal audit of Washington State? I was born here and am an RN and only make about $70,000. No raises in the last 10 years. Can't afford any more, and I'm at my wit's end. Yes, we could get a federal audit. I don't know what that would look like, though. It's like an inspector general coming out. I don't know that they typically investigate state. I would love to see the IG develop a system where they do come out and audit, deep dive audits, especially in the biggest amount of money that comes into our state is usually going to come into like DSHS, for example. Because essentially DSHS becomes like the welfare provider for the federal government and whatever programs they're running. And there's a lot of fraud that goes on there that it's willfully ignored and it isn't addressed. I've talked about this in other videos before about the whistleblowers I've had come out of DSHS. So I don't think I have the time to get into all that detail there now, but there's a tremendous amount. It's not being found. The feds would be able to save, I don't think I don't think it's at the $1 billion level. Could be. Maybe it's hundreds of millions, but it's definitely hundreds of millions of dollars and maybe more, just by shutting down some of the fraudulent operations that the state's well aware of right now, which in turn, in theory, could start to blow back and reduce some of the government excess. But, eventually we're going to have some issues. I'm sorry that you haven't had a raise in a long time. I do think that deporting a lot of people who are probably taking jobs from others is going to create a little bit of shift in the labor market and provide more opportunities for future job growth. The inflation problem is more of a federal issue. The devaluation of the dollar, I don't think inflation's going away. So, but RNs have lots of opportunities. You might want to be looking around. I'm fairly familiar with the medical system, and but that you have other opportunities to get other types of jobs that'll pay more. A specialty, especially within medicine, is going to work a little bit better. Ken Kakok, looking forward to discussing Public Records Act. My records request from 2011 is still trickling in. 2011? Well, that doesn't sound right. No label on the disc, no way to reference what was sent. Can I post these records? I don't know what you're looking for, but obviously if you get something through a public records request, it's public, so you can post anywhere you want. It's just, that's a long time to have a trickle-in records request. I had one that I thought was really long that I'd filed in 2013 with Labor and Industries, and it trickled in for 4 years, but it was millions of records, so it was a lot. So anyway. 5 Acre Farmer, Eastern Washington, always has huge fires in the summer. They do. It doesn't have to be as big or as bad as they've become there, though, and that's worth noting. Also, if you do burning in the spring or the fall, when you can do it safely and in controlled settings, you would have far fewer and far less significant fires. Plus, if they let you actually do adequate thinning, limbing, brush clearing, and fire breaks, you would have a lot less problem as well. So anyway, it's just kind of crazy the stuff that we see them going on. What bills have caught your eye so far? Will we see a Ministry of Truth this year besides tax increases? There's a number of bills that have caught my eye. I didn't get a chance to do some of these videos earlier today, but there was one video I'm going to kind of focus on. I think the hearing's coming up later this week, about making it more difficult and throwing up a bunch more barriers to being able to do individual voter challenges. The only reason I'm kind of familiar with that is because the Washington Voter Research Project that I've run for a while now and worked with a number of others. It's just a little nonprofit. We don't even have a bank account. We're set up. It's just a way to be organized and go out there. And one of the things that we found is we were doing voter challenges, individual voter challenges, which usually they get 1 or 2 a year in a county. But we were doing them in batches as we were finding and discovering problems with the voter rolls out there in the field. And we were finding lots of problems. And probably where we had some pretty effective voter challenge efforts that moved forward. But of course, the auditors don't like anybody questioning their incompetence. Good auditors don't mind it. Kittitas County auditor has been good. Mason County auditor has been good. Franklin County auditor has been good. I believe the Grays Harbor auditor has been pretty good, and I believe Cowlitz County's generally been pretty good. But a lot of these auditors don't like that, and especially Thurston County, King County, Skagit, Whatcom, and Spokane. How dare anybody participate in the process and actually remove people that should have been removed from the voter rolls because they died, they moved to another state and registered to vote there. They're voting in 2 states simultaneously. They moved 2 decades ago and somehow they're still getting ballots there, whatever the excuse or reason is. When you're finding this stuff and you're trying to get it cleaned up, they have done nothing but got freaked out about it, even though the numbers are relatively minor so far, mainly because of logistics in doing it. And so, of course, Mary Hall, the auditor from Thurston County, got Doglio, the legislator out of Olympia, to propose a stupid bill and then have a couple other goofy people sign on with her. And it's just a terrible idea. It's all about making it harder to fix things that are broken in Washington. But it won't be the first time we've seen that happen. I think that bill doesn't have any support, or limited support, but it's still worth getting into. Leprechaun Garage, what are your thoughts on boys participating in girls' teams? My daughter was 11th and first place. 11th and 1 place out of all league honors because a boy placed better than her this year at a league meet. thank you for bringing that up. I think it's a horrific idea, terrible idea, that boys be allowed to participate in girls' sports and essentially suppress the ability of girls somewhere along the line in being able to participate and be successful. I've had 4 kids who who were in varsity athletics in high school. And one of them still is right now as a senior. My youngest daughter finished her state swim meet, during swim season. So she's done. But my other 2 kids participated in cross country, track, swimming, and wrestling, depending on which kid they were. And they're in college now. One's at the Air Force Academy and one's over in Montana. And those, and the boys sort of irrelevant, but the girls, because I've had girl athletes, my daughters are athletes, I have watched this change occur. It hasn't affected them, it never affected them personally where they were at, but by God, it's definitely affecting a bunch of other people, and I'm starting to see it happen more and more. It's absurd, it's ridiculous. They need to, the whole purpose behind Title IX was to give women a safe place, not to create a way that boys could pretend to be women and then come over and take space, awards and recognitions and everything away from women. There is a whole reason why they created it. Now, I understand Democrats can't identify what a woman is anymore. Neither can Supreme Court justices if they align themselves with the left. But we can't cater to somebody else's pathological and mental problems if they're having those problems. And I get it. Listen, if you want to go live your life that way after you're an adult, fine. But when you're younger, you can't go and force you shouldn't be using your own drama to create more drama for others around you. It's absurd and ridiculous. And I'm sorry that happened to your daughter. I understand the significance of that. I know a girl that didn't go to state in cross country this year because of the same thing that happened in the 2A league in cross country with a boy. I was there at the state meet last year at track. My son was running the 800 meter, and before him was the girls 400 meter. And I watched that boy beat the girl who should have won and deserved to win, and who was clearly the fastest 400 meter in 2A in the state. And she got beat by this random boy who was kind of a loser. He'd never been that significant a runner as a boy, but he pretended to be a girl, and then he could beat up on the girls and win a state title when the guy wouldn't have been able to ever get to state with his running time before. So catering to that kind of problem doesn't help girls at all, and it really destroys their opportunities moving forward. And I have to tell you, when I watched this race at the state meet, I was standing next to about 20 girls there, and they were pissed. They were girls that saw what was happening, and they were not happy. And, it's amazing to see the sea change occur with people who never thought they would ever pay attention to politics before, but they suddenly realized that the Democrat ideology, and this is exclusively aligned with the Democrat Party. It's an extreme wing of that party, but it's still there. This is something that's definitely driving a bunch of people to question just what kind of insanity that party is allowing inside of their operation, and it's clearly harmful and destructive to the people who live here. And those girls weren't happy, and nor should they have been. It's pretty bad, actually, if you've ever observed that. And I've seen it now happen a couple times, so it's pretty bad. Let's see, what will it take to get a good, solid U.S. attorney into Washington? It would be nice to actually have somebody watching more closely on the grifting projects, et cetera. Good question, Cheryl Presley. This is a great question, and this has to do with the fact that the new Trump administration, starting next week, can start to appoint new U.S. attorneys. In Washington State, we get 2. We get one on the west side based out of Seattle and one on the east side based out of Spokane. Here's what we have to do. The senators in every state have a prerogative. This isn't a legal thing. This is just a historic prerogative that they've been granted over the years, kind of a courtesy, where they have what they call blue slip, and they can basically say, no, I'm sorry, we're not going to let that Republican be appointed to the U.S. attorney. And the president can overrule that, and frankly, the Senate can decide to overrule it. And the Republicans in the Senate are probably going to have to do that with pressure from the Trump administration, because otherwise we probably won't get honest or good U.S. attorneys or federal judges appointed in our state at all, because that's what's happened for the past 30 years. You've had these blue slips that come in and prevent the appointment under the previous Trump administration, under the Bush administration, under going all the way back probably to the Bush 1 administration. I mean, we know the Democrats won't appoint anybody serious out here, but the Republicans weren't able to appoint anybody serious either. So at best, you got a milquetoast person who had no interest in actually doing anything in that position, and that is not what the Trump administration is looking for right now. And I know this because I know people who are on those conference calls discussing it, and I have helped feed lists of attorneys or people who I think would be good candidates into that process. And any of those people that I've referred them to that I think that they would consider, and I'm not important, I just happen to work with a lot of attorneys in the state, but I mean, any of those people would be great and a huge improvement, and it would be a radical difference, probably the first time in a generation anybody's ever bothered to look at public integrity cases in our state, which is one reason why the political class here has no interest in getting honest people into those positions who are assertive and aggressive, willing to actually dig into the stuff. That's a big deal, but you're going to have to pressure the Republicans in the Senate to get rid of that blue slip rejection process. I think the Trump administration can do that a little bit, but we'll have to see. Jet Vet, I am thinking of moving from Cheney to North Idaho. Is Idaho a better run state? I would say Idaho is a more naive run state. You have Republicans, and I'll put that in air quotes, that supposedly run the state of Idaho. On its surface, it looks okay, and certainly it's better run than Washington when it comes to the distribution and waste of money and resources. But if you go to Boise, for example, same problems, identical. In fact, ridiculously, there's people moving from Washington into Boise and then, in fact, running for local government and taking over. They might even call themselves Republicans now, even if they were crazy leftist loons here. And the Republican Party is asleep at the switch out there. Most of the Republicans that are elected in Idaho, clueless as heck. Most of the people who run the Republican Party in Idaho, clueless as heck. I've never seen people so naive in my life. And because they say they have an R next to their name, the presumption is that they're going to run, that everything's going to be fine. It won't be fine because you're not paying attention just because they're dressing up a pig and putting a lipstick and a bow on it and pretending like it's a conservative policy. It isn't. It's the exact same dumb idea that we had in Washington and Oregon and California. The difference is in Idaho, they're asleep at the switch, and they don't realize what they're facing. Same thing with Wyoming, same thing with Oklahoma, same thing with North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and other places. Now, Montana's woken up a little bit because I think that they've had this surge back and forth. You almost have to experience it to understand the seriousness of allowing an ideology that's so destructive to come in. It's, and it isn't really fair anymore even to say Democrat or Republican. It's more like you care about freedom and liberty on one side, and then you're just a statist, left-leaning crazy on the other side. A lot of ways, not completely, but sometimes they are. And that's not generally what they wear on their sleeve when they're trying to take over Idaho, but they'll pretend to be conservative-ish, sort of, or pretend to be Republican in some way. And then what they'll do is say, but, we got to compromise on this or that or whatever it is. That's how your freedoms get lost. That's how they're being lost in Idaho right now as we speak. And what surprises me is always how naive many of the Republicans back there end up being. It surprises me. So I think I'm going to just kind of close this out today. I'm sorry, I know it's a Monday. It's not the day I usually do my live streams. For the fellow, for basically, there's a couple things I've been hoping to do a little bit more that I just haven't gotten around to. One is doing some of these other podcasts. I had some new equipment that was donated to me, getting it set up to do a better podcast, a video podcast, which is really what I'm trying to do. Just wasn't able to get to that this holiday, over the break. It looks like I may have 2 kids in the Air Force Academy pretty soon, so I've got a lot of busy work as a dad, just kind of get ready for that too. But this is a crazy legislative session. I'm encouraging everybody to basically engage, get involved. It is so easy now. Watch my video that'll come out very shortly on how to do the pro and con statements and how to make comments on these pieces of legislation. There's so many bad ones, but there are some good ones too. It's good if you can make some comments and get a little bit of traction there on the good bills and stop some of those bad bills. And I've seen it happen many, many times before. So just because the Democrats may have a majority in both the House and the Senate, it doesn't always mean that they're going to be as self-destructive as they appear to be. So keep up the fight, and remember, as I always say, the future does belong to those who show up, and I want to encourage people to keep showing up. And also, just with what we've seen in California with LA, we see it in North Carolina, right? You see it all over the country. Bad things can suddenly happen. The power grid can go down. Earthquakes can happen. You can have incompetent government that fails to help you. Presume that's going to be the outcome anyway. Be prepared at home. Always be prepared. It was a good Boy Scout motto, probably one of the best mottos of all time. I'd encourage everybody just to think about that. Have a plan for how you would be there to help your family and how to help your neighbors. Communities that can bind together and can work together are going to survive and do quite well, all things considered, even in times of great stress and crisis. If you remain a stranger to all your neighbors, if you don't have any plans, then that's a plan. It's just a plan to fail most of the time and to make things worse. So try to come up with some of those scenarios. Don't be too doom and gloom about it. Just have a plan and try to be prepared. I think living rurally is a bonus compared to living in a city. That's just me. But, come up with a way and a plan to, survive tough times. Just because Trump's taken office doesn't mean there aren't going to be really difficult times coming forward. There will be. It doesn't matter that Trump's there. It does matter in the sense he's going to be way better than, what the Democrats are pushing for president. But he's going to have a lot of fights and a lot of obstacles and a lot of things to overcome there. And you can't presume that the government's coming to rescue you when you get into tough times. And all we can hope for is that we're putting good people in the government into these positions that are willing to substantially downsize us, the size of our government, keep us out of a major war, and hopefully kind of muddle through what's going to be probably very difficult times the next 4 years to 8 years or so. We have to see how it goes. And who knows, we may be able to see a really good turnaround like they're seeing in Argentina right now, but it won't be easy. And there are a lot of people that seem to want things to go bad. And so we probably have a lot of work cut out for us to ensure that we're there to watch our families and our friends and our community and our neighbors. But it starts with you, it starts with me, it starts with our piece of the world that we can influence and affect. Thank you guys so much for watching. Loved your comments today. And hopefully next week we'll be back on a regular Tuesday event. And if I don't see you at tomorrow's event in Redmond or Monday's event out in Spokane, hopefully I'll see you at the Roanoke Conference the following weekend. Hope all's well, and we will talk to you then.